Lawyers and police officers of Reddit. What is the dumbest reason you've seen someone get arrested? In the 1980s I was a detective in Cape Town. One day while driving in Woodstock we saw a group of people chasing a man. So we assisted. Turned out he was suspected of stealing from a passenger in a third-class train carriage. Those are very crowded with many passengers standing close together. In his pocket he had a pay envelope from a local fish packing place, containing no money, but a piece of cartoning which was written, "Haha. Lekker jeving. Afrikaans for lol caught you good." The people giving chase insisted that he had pickpocketed someone on the train and jumped out at Woodstock station. Long story short, we traced the owner of the pay envelope. His name and employee number were on the envelope. Who said that, after being pickpocketed twice before and losing a week's wages, he hid his money in his sock and made a decoy with the top of a pack of 30 cigarettes on which he wrote the Afrikaans taunt. The culprit was convicted of theft of an envelope valued at 15 cents and ended up with a criminal record. Can't recall what the sentence was, unfortunately. Someone in my town crashed into a telephone pole and took out the power. The road was closed off while things were sorted out. One lady decided she couldn't take the long way home and crashed into the same telephone pole. She was arrested for drunk driving. Not me, but when my husband was arrested, he was out on his boat fishing and forgot his life jacket in the truck. Game warden wrote him a ticket, told him he didn't have to appear in court and to come to the courthouse on the date listed to pay the ticket. Cool. No big deal. The day came for my husband to pay the ticket. He was in the area for work, so he figured he would pop in instead of driving back out there. About 45-minute drive. He went in to pay the ticket. Gave it to the girl so she could process it. And she said, "You can't pay this. There is a warrant out for your arrest." My husband was extremely confused and no one would say anything to him about what was going on. A 60-year-old sheriff came over and handcuffed him while the sheriff was walking him across the road to the jail. He finally explained it to my husband. There was a warrant out because he failed to appear in court. Remember, the game warden said he didn't have to appear in court and even checked on the ticket that he did not have to appear. But my husband told the sheriff that, and the sheriff knew. He also knew this particular game warden. According to the sheriff, this was not the first time this had happened. I ended up bailing him out, and he was on probation for a year. I was on a ride along. Guy gets pulled over. Hands his brother's ID to the officer. It is not a good match. Officer asks him when he was born. He gets that one right. Asks him how old he is. He's off by 2 years. He's being put in the car and the officer says, "You're the first guy I've arrested for bad math." Oh god. Where to start? The $30 worth of knickknacks someone stole from Walmart. The guy who robbed the gas station down the road from his grandma's, where the teller recognized his voice and called him out by name. The assault with a weapon, where the weapon was a frozen poultry, my personal favorite. Or the nurse who decided to use her client's debit card as petty cash. Probably the last one. Woman was 5 years from retirement and will never work as a nurse again. Not my arrest, but someone on my job got a call from an individual staying in one of the hotels stating he thought he saw a man with a gun on the 3rd floor. The whole squad rolls over there and clears the hotel. No gunman found. Turns out the guy who called was just high AF and was seeing crap. So the hotel manager asks the guy to leave. He reluctantly does so. An officer and one of the SDTS are there to waiting help escort the man out of the hotel while he gathers his belongings. This man was about to leave when he lifts up the mattress and grabs his crack pipes and a couple of crack rocks right in front of the officer and sergeant. Promptly placed under arrest. Congratulations. You played yourself. Work for a smaller county. Last fall we got a group of people coming me down from a nearby city to rob a hemp farm, thinking it was weed growing along the highway. Several of the crack team of bandits were arrested and lodged. The kicker is it was explained explicitly how dumb it was. That you can't even get high of the stuff. But the very next weekend they came back down and tried to pull it off again. Only this time the farmer was home and ended up holding them all at gunpoint till we arrived. I arrested a guy who continually called 911 asking police to bring him weed and a cheeseburger. He then proceeded to eat the foam padding of my roll bars in the back seat. I've never seen someone trip so bad. Edit. Link. Not me. But my grandma was a lawyer. She had to defend someone who stole from a store in a city in Hungary around midnight. The only reason they got caught was because they used some matches to light up the place, and that set the fire alarm off. As if that wasn't enough, a few weeks later in court, my grandma tells the judge to look at the kid, how young he was, and that he couldn't have been strong enough to break open the door or carry something outside and steal it. At this point the defendant stands up, points at his muscles and shouts, "Hell yeah, I could." That's basically when my grandma gave up. As far as I know, he got a few months in prison. We never arrested him, but I investigated a fraud where a guy called our department that issue licenses to captain oil tankers etc. when they told him he didn't have enough evidence of previous sea experience. He literally emailed in a photograph of him sat at his computer forging a sea service testimonial for his last company and asked, "Is this okay?" I was part of our law enforcement unit, and we agreed we needed to ask Parliament to add a new merchant shipping offense for being a total ducking idiot. Underage kid. He was 20, I think. Who has been drinking and still has the beer on him. Decides he's hungry. He goes into a mini mart and hides the beer in his pocket so that no one knows he's been drinking. He goes to buy his snacks and the clerk notices that this kid has tucked extremely noticeable beers into his pocket. Clerk calls the cops and tells them that the kid was shoplifting beer. The cops actually believed the kid's story, but arrested him anyway for underage drinking. He spent the night in jail. I was a seasonal officer at a beach resort. One day I was stuck in the substation working on a bunch of reports when I hear another seasonal officer and a senior officer get dispatched to a hotel for unknown reasons. 2 hours later, and I'm still doing paperwork. In fairness, I took a break for lunch, and both of the officers come in with arms full of large brown paper evidence bags, like the 2 feet tall ones you out groceries in. They start pulling out the most varied amount of drugs I've seen ever. Something like 2 large vacuum bags of good weed. Not the dry crap. 2 pages of LSD tabs, a gallon bag of shrooms and a bunch more. Apparently this 19-year-old had come to the beach to deal. He had paid for a few nights at this hotel. Well, he missed his checkout time and the hotel needed the room, so the housekeeper let herself. She undid the covers and found this buffet of drugs. The kid ended up showing up while the officers were searching his hotel room, and they got him. Not a cop or a lawyer, but I knew a guy in high school who got arrested for impersonating a police officer and pulling over a real-life off-duty cop who also happened to know him from high school and found him pretty easily because of that. There was a news story in Denmark recently. A guy had stolen the customer hand sanitizer from a pharmacy *AFTER**. He picked up his prescription drugs. Because of his prescription they easily identified him. Police called him and asked him to return it. He refused, so they had to pay him a visit, seize the hand sanitizer, and also arrest him. My dad once got arrested because he didn't believe the cop in Civis was a real cop, so he slapped him. Turns out he really was a real cop. Not a police officer or a lawyer, but someone I went to school with took MDMA and then decided to go for a drive, and the police tried to pull him over and he tried to escape, ran like 8 red lights, and crashed into a prison of all places. I used to work at a juvenile detention center. We had a local police department bring in a 10-year-old boy for hitting his house with a broomstick. I'm from a small town, and once this stupid guy decides to rob one of the small grocery stores in town. This idiot apparently didn't have a car, as he decides his getaway transport would be a train, as the train station is close. Keep in mind this is a small town, where a train comes by every 30 minutes. So not the best idea for a quick escapule. The grocery store calls the police, who have no problem finding this guy. Why? The train station is literally on the other side of the road from the grocery store. My sister was a legal assistant for a while when she was in school. She went to a hearing with her lawyer and the judge asked the defendant, "And how much marijuana did you have on you?" To which the defendant responded, "Oh no, Your Honor. It was cocaine." Not entirely sure how that got messed up. But the judge apparently gave the look of "how ducking stupid are you?" Back in my first year of uni, a guy in halls who was the biggest druggie ever got super high and called the police because someone in his flat has lots of drugs and was selling them. Currently with the stay-at-home policy in France, when you need to get out for a valid reason, for groceries, doctor etc., you need to print out a form with your details, name, address, reason you're going out etc. Some guys did rob a place and forgot their form at the place they robbed with all their details. Police found them pretty quickly. I know how annoying it is when people do this, but I'm not a lawyer or a police officer. But I do know the dumbest crime I've ever heard of. My dad's helmet from university. A young man walking home from a night out passed a bus depot and decided to take a bus for a spin, help people get home etc. Upon return to the bus depot, he was arrested on a few charges including drink driving, endangering the public, and a weird form of theft as he returned it without prompting. Following the charges, he was released awaiting trial, likely going to receive a nasty slap on the wrist, some fines, maybe a short prison stay, and a suspension of his driving license. Not long before the trial, he needed a good night out with friends, and he walked home past that same bus depot. It was just too tempting. He served 2 years. I work in police dispatch. You would be surprised how many people with warrants call and request officers to come to their house for unrelated things. Guess they just assume the officer won't run them. Edit. My favorite instance of someone shooting theirself in foot was just a couple weeks ago though. Someone calls up and says that another mom at the park is screaming "street her kids" and would like an officer to come talk to her. I smiled to myself, told the woman I would get someone headed over. Officers got on scene and sent everyone home because the park is closed due to COVID. Not arrested, but I gave someone an unnecessary ticket. I drove past 2 girls on a sidewalk and one was holding a beer can. I backed up and pulled up next to them, but now the beer was gone. I ask the girl where it went, and she denies having a beer. I tell her to get it and dispose of it. She tells me she's 22 anyway. I respond, great. No reason to get in trouble for alcohol. Just go get the can and properly dispose of it. She denies it again. Again I tell her to just throw it away. Her friend tells her just go get it. She still denies ever having a beer. I walk a few feet back to where I saw them and surprise, there's a beer can on the ground. She got an open container ticket at 22 and a warning for littering. The worst part is, after she got the ticket she asks what if I was holding it for my friend, because she's not 21. I tell her I wouldn't throw my friend under the bus, since she was the one in possession when I saw them, so it wouldn't have mattered. She still didn't seem to grasp that nobody had to get in trouble if she just picked it up. Had one of our state troopers bring a guy into the county jail for failure to yield at green light. It was a 20 ticket, but the guy kept telling the trooper to arrest him. So he did. Dude cried like a baby when he got booked in. Trooper called his bluff. He got out in about 6 hours. Lawyer. Client was arrested because he got drunk one night. Headed home, forgetting he had just moved out of this particular house. Confused when his key didn't work, but too drunk to realize his mistake. Smashed a window to get in. Ate some chips. Then realized his mistake when he noticed all the furniture that wasn't his. He was charged with break, enter, and larceny for eating the chips. A former coworker got a speeding ticket. Called to pay the ticket. Person on the other end, there was no record of any citation for him. After a few minutes of back and forth, the person insists he does not have a ticket. A few months later gets pulled over again. After an investigation, it turns out the person on the phone had misheard the information my coworker had given them. He paid the ticket, and they let him leave. Not police, but a guy I knew fell over onto a police officer, who thought the guy was attacking him. He got arrested. Sensibly. No charges were pressed, and the cop ended up buying the guy pizza to apologize. Deleted. Obligatory, not a lawyer or a cop. But my fiancé is a cop in a major US city. One of his fellow, very overzealous officers arrested a homeless guy on Christmas Day because he fell asleep in the park. The park closed at 11 p.m., so he broke the law. Yeah. Everyone gives the officer crap for it still to this day. I saw a Puerto Rican arrested for being in the United States illegally. Oops. For those of you who don't know, the people of Puerto Rico are United States citizens. Not quite. But from the FB page of my old local police dept. Northern Beaches Police Area Command Strike 1. 8:25 last night patrolling police saw a blue Mazda CX-5 driving in less than a straight line in Manly. Stopped for a random breath test. The 66-year-old local woman was positive roadside. Back at the station, her blood alcohol reading was a mid-range 0-131. Result 1. License suspended. Court date booked. Strike 2. Not long after the woman left the station, police noticed her car had gone from where it was left. They dropped around to her home where they found the car. And her. How did you get home? They asked. I drove. She admitted. Result 2. Car keys confiscated. Additional charges of drive while suspended plus drive under the influence of alcohol. A guy was in lockup all weekend before arraignment. He was arraigned on charges of stealing a single bottle on BBQ sauce. A whole weekend in jail just for a single bottle of BBQ sauce. And that's not even the sentence. It's before arraignment. Feel bad for the guy. Turns out he also had an arson hold. Apparently, he burns down buildings to make his BBQ. Lol. TL. Doctor at bottom. We responded to some sort of disturbance in a trailer park. This was about 10-11 years ago, so I don't remember the exact details of the disturbance. But whatever it wasn't anything major. Basically we told the 4 guys involved to cut the crap out and go to bed. Or at least keep it inside. Since it was like 2 a.m. and the neighbors had to work in the morning. Anyway, as usual, we ran everyone's information to make sure no one has any warrants. One guy comes back with a piddly FDA warrant for a suspended license or something. We go to put cuffs on him, and he tells us that wasn't his real name, and that he gave his friend's name because he thought he had a warrant and didn't know his friend had a warrant. So we run his real name, and it turns out he doesn't actually have any warrants. He ends up getting arrested for giving the wrong name, and also gets charged with identity theft and couple other related charges, since the name he gave was actually a real name. One of the officers in scene walks Dum Dum outside to put him in a car, and Dum Dum decides to slam his own head into the hood of my SGT's brand new car hard enough to leave 3 dents in the hood. He hit the hood hard enough that it activated the dash cam, so there wasn't any question about what happened, so now he was getting charged with vandalism as well. We call EMS to check him out for a possible head injury. They decide to transport him to a hospital in another county. The guy then starts making suicidal statements, so it turned into an emergency evaluation in addition to all the other bullcrap. The charging officer heads to the precinct to take care of the criminal charges, while another officer follows the ambulance to the hospital to complete the evil paperwork, and then leaves once everything is signed, and the guy is turned over to the hospital. We weren't going to sit on the guy, since an emergency evil takes several hours at a bare minimum, and he could end up getting held for up to 3 days, if that's what the doctor decides. In cases like that, we just send a letter to the hospital requesting that they notify us when he's getting discharged, so we can go pick him up to serve the warrant he now has. About an hour after the officer leaves the hospital, they call us to say that the guy walked out of the ER on his own, and they don't know where he went, which was a big duck up on their part, since he was supposed to be held for an evaluation. Since it was in another county and out of our jurisdiction, we weren't going to go look for him. Had the guy just given us his real name to begin with, we would have been done with the call in maybe 15 minutes. Instead, he ends up getting charges with several misdemeanors and a felony. My SGT's brand new car needs to be repaired. Dumbus gives himself a minor head injury. Gets an emergency eval served on him. And then the hospital ducks up by not actually watching the guy, like they were supposed to. The guy was running around with that open warrant for 4 years before someone finally came across him. TL. Doctor. We respond to a minor disturbance, where we just told the guys involved to be quiet and go inside. When one guy thinks he has a warrant, so gives a friend's information. The friend, who isn't there, does have warrant. But the guy who gave his info doesn't. He gets arrested. Then slams his own head into the hood of a patrol car several times. Gets transported by EMS to the hospital. Makes suicidal statements. Gets served with an emergency evaluation. Then the hospital lets him walk out of the ER after they take custody of him. The Dumbus ends up running around with an open warrant for 4 years as a result. I'm neither a lawyer or a police officer. But when I read this question, I remembered something my co-worker said. She's a boomer. Her son is in his 30s. And in his early 20s. He had a heroin problem. His mother could always tell he was high. Because he would clean and clean and clean when he was high. And sit around and do nothing when he was not. Well, it was time for another hit. And he had already pawned everything else of value in the house. So what does he do? Go to his poor old elderly neighbor's house. Breaks into the garage and steals crap in there. Cops are called. I think another neighbor spotted him and called. But the elderly neighbor didn't want to press charges. Heroin addict showed remorse enough so that the elderly neighbor believed him. And the addict cut the elderly neighbor's lawn all the time. So it was all good. Except for the heroin addict wasn't having that crap. This man who had an otherwise clean record felt guilty enough, and still high enough I guess, that he asked the officers to continue with pressing charges on himself. Everybody else was okay with the kid getting off scot-free. The officers explained to him that he would be charged with a crime and that this was serious. He more or less told the cops that he had done wrong and wanted to pay for his mistake. It was something expensive he tried to steal, so it was counted as a felony, I think. The breaking and entering thing was something he was also charged with. Dude spent almost 7 years in prison. He is still on probation today. This dude that had a clean record ducked himself all up because he basically wanted to. I'm not a lawyer or police officer, but in my town a man was arrested for slapping his ex-best friend with a fish. I used to find this hilarious. I'm a firefighter, and I was at a fire. Arson. Domestic violence kind of scene. Dude had piled all his old lady's stuff in and around the fireplace and set it all on fire. He was with the cops after we had put out the fire and was explaining the situation. He told the cop he was intending to burn up her stuff and burn down the house. The cop patiently explained to him that setting her stuff on fire in a fireplace was one thing, but trying to burn down an occupied house was something completely different, and would the gentleman like to clarify and possibly revise his statement? The guy repeated that he was trying to both burn up the stuff confined to the fireplace and also to burn the house down with them in it. The cop explained again the difference between the two offenses and again requested clarification, but our hapless offender stood by his story. At this point the officer read a short statement from a card he carried in his pocket, and then requested a much more official and legally binding version from the resident. Said resident patiently and obstinately explained that he was trying to burn down the house and all the stuff, and couldn't be more clear in his explanation. If the officer wouldn't listen to him, I got called on the case a couple times and the guy ended up with 12 years in the Florida prison system. Maybe possibly PMITA prison. But probably just regular old play cards and wonder why cops are stupid. Prison. Man steals car. Man runs out of gas. Man calls us for help because other states have spoiled their people by bringing them gas for free. Man also happens to have fully extraditable warrants. So he goes to jail, and car is recovered. Not my story but my grandfather's. Faintly remember, so some details will be left out. It was around the 1970s in NH. My grandpa responded to robbery, and when they got there no one was there, so they started to investigate the scene. When they went around back and saw a guy in all black just chillin' digging through the trash, and asked what he was doing. He said, "I'm looking for my friends," and my grandpa asks him if he needed help finding his friends, and the guy said yes. So not more than 5 minutes later the guy called out into the woods and had 2 other men in all black come out, and you'll never guess it, but they're the ones that robbed the place and all went to jail because of their dumbass friend.